I won't let you destroy her, a dying child, a father with no options, and the one secret that changes everything. There was a man who had survived things that would break most people, ambushes in the dark, firefights in places no map could find, years of carrying weight that never had a name. Came home from all of it. He built something small and quiet and his, and then life handed him the one enemy. His training never prepared him for watching his little girl get sicker while the money ran out, and the doctors started talking in careful, measured tones that meant we're running out of time. He survived war. He wasn't sure he could survive this. Als, if this story moves you, subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss what happens next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see how far this story travels. Every single comment means the world to me. Now let's begin. The storm came in hard off the coast that Tuesday night, the kind that turned the streets slick and black and emptied out the parking lots by 9. Cole Mercer was grateful for it. Fewer people meant fewer conversations he'd have to pretend his way through. He was mopping the east corridor of the Whitmore Tower lobby when the elevator opened. He didn't look up right away. That was habit. You learn after enough years of scanning rooftops and doorways and shadows that obvious attention is a liability. You take in what you need from your peripheral. You build the picture without making anyone feel like they're being studied. So he registered her before she registered him. Woman. Early 30s maybe. Charcoal blazer, the kind that costs more than his monthly rent. Hair still pinned, but coming loose on one side, she'd been running her hand through it. Something people do when they're holding themselves together by will alone. Heels she moved in like she'd forgotten she was wearing them. Jaw set, eyes sharp, but the skin under them told a different story. She was on the phone. I said, I need the file before midnight, Derek. Not tomorrow morning. Tonight. A pause. I don't care what time zone he's in. Figure it out. She ended the call without waiting for a response and walked toward the glass doors, then stopped. The rain was coming sideways now. Even from across the lobby, Cole could see the moment she registered that she hadn't brought an umbrella, hadn't thought about rain, hadn't thought past the next crisis in whatever line of crises she was working through. She stood at the doors and just looked at the water sheeting down the glass. Cole went back to the mop. 15 seconds passed. Excuse me. He turned. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who wasn't used to asking for things and was mildly annoyed that she had to. Is there an umbrella service? Or I don't know. Somewhere I could get a cab called. Cab apps faster on a night like this, Cole said. But the overhang on the east side buys you about 12 feet of dry. Side entrance, down the hall. She looked at him, the way people looked at him sometimes, like they were trying to figure out if what he'd said was actually helpful, or if he was just filling silence. Then she gave a short nod. Thank you. She started walking. Cole watched her go for exactly the amount of time it took to confirm she'd found the right corridor, then turned back to the mop bucket. He had 4 more hours on shift. Cole Mercer had been 31 when he left the Navy. He told his commanding officer it was because of Sarah, and that was true. The way a lot of incomplete things are true, it contained the right facts, but left out the texture of them. The real version was this. He'd come home from his last deployment, and Sarah had been at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, Emma asleep upstairs, and she'd looked at him across the room with an expression he'd never seen on her before. Like she was calculating something. Like she'd been running the numbers while he was gone, and the math hadn't come out the way she'd hoped. I need you to tell me something, she'd said. Okay, and I need you to actually tell me. Not we're fine, Sarah, stop worrying, but actually tell me. He'd sat down. He remembered the linoleum was cold through his socks. He remembered Emma's drawing on the refrigerator, a lopsided horse with too many legs that Emma had called Gerald for reasons she refused to explain. I'm here, he'd said. Are you? He hadn't answered fast enough. He knew that now. In the moment, he'd thought he was just taking time to give a real answer. But Sarah watched the pause, and she'd understood something in it that he was still working out years later. He'd left the Navy 8 months after that conversation. He'd done everything the books and the counselors told him transitioned slowly, built routines, stayed connected. He and Sarah had tried. They'd tried hard. But there are distances that don't close no matter how much both people want them to, and eventually the kindest thing they'd done for each other was agree to stop pretending the distance wasn't there. Emma was 3 when Sarah moved to Portland. The agreement was joint custody, civilized and careful, with Sarah flying Emma back for school year and Cole driving up for summers and holidays. It had worked mostly until Sarah's accident. A wet highway, a truck drifting lanes. Emma was 5. Cole became a full-time father 12 hours after the phone call that rearranged the rest of his life. He was 34. He had a daughter who cried at night for a mother who wasn't coming back. He had a skill set built entirely around things he was trying to leave behind. And he had a very specific understanding of his own limits, which had gotten him through a lot of difficult situations, but did not include how to grieve properly, or how to explain death to a 5-year-old, or how to make the nightmares stop for both of them. He figured most of it out badly and slowly, the way people do. Emma was 7 now. She liked dinosaurs and terrible puns and a particular brand of strawberry yogurt that was only sold at one grocery store 20 minutes away, and Cole drove there every week because some things you just did. She also had a heart condition that her cardiologist described with words Cole had written down phonetically and then spent evenings researching because he needed to understand what he was dealing with. The short version was this: her heart had a structural problem. It had been manageable. It was becoming less manageable. There was a surgical option, a specific procedure at a specific cardiac center in Boston that her doctor said offered the best chance at a normal childhood, a normal life, a future where she wasn't building her world around her limitations. The procedure cost more than Cole made in 2 years. Insurance covered a portion. The portion left over was still a number that kept him awake at 3 in the morning staring at the water stain on the ceiling of their apartment. He'd looked into everything: assistance programs, payment plans, a GoFundMe that his neighbor Denise had set up without asking that had raised enough to pay for one consultation appointment. He was not a man who asked for help easily. He was working on that. Emma had told him once, with the specific bluntness of a 7-year-old, that it was okay to ask people for things, Daddy. That's what people are for. He'd laughed and hugged her and thought about it for 3 days afterward. The Whitmore Tower job was nights. The pay was decent for what it was. Cole had taken it because it had health benefits and because the night shift meant he was home when Emma woke up, home for breakfast, home to take her to school. He slept in broken pieces when he could. He'd done worse in worse places. He mopped floors and fixed things maintenance hadn't gotten around to, and kept his head down and tried not to think about Boston. He saw her again an hour later. She came back through the lobby, phone in hand, and this time she stopped. "You're still here," she said. "Shift ends at 2. She looked at the mop, then at him, and there was something in the look not unkind, just genuinely uncertain, like she was trying to reconcile two things that didn't fit together yet. "I have a question," she said. "Okay, and you don't have to answer." "Also okay." She seemed to measure something, then decided. "You looked at me when I got off that elevator before. Not the way most people look. You were assessing. Like you were filing something." Cole didn't say anything. "I've had security professionals look at me that way," she continued. "It's military. People who've been trained to read rooms. You looked at me like that and then went back to mopping like it was nothing." She paused. "So, who are you, Cole Mercer?" "That's a name. I asked who you are." He looked at her for a moment. She was sharp, he'd give her that. Most people took longer to get there, or didn't bother. "Man who mops floors," he said. "Good night." Her name was Sophia Whitmore. He didn't need to look that up. The building had her name on it. What he hadn't known, until Marcus in the security booth mentioned it over coffee at midnight, was that Whitmore Medical Technologies was currently in what the financial news called a period of significant internal restructuring, which was the polite way of saying the company was eating itself. "Big meeting last week," Marcus said, refilling his cup. "I don't know the details, but I heard it got loud. And Ms. Whitmore, she doesn't come back here past 9 unless something's wrong. She's here almost every night this week." Cole drank his coffee and looked at the lobby cameras on the monitor bank. "She's dealing with something," he said. "Yeah. Well, people with that much money still got problems." Marcus shrugged. "Different problems. Still problems." Emma called at 11:15. She wasn't supposed to. She was supposed to be asleep, Mrs. Delgado downstairs had a key and checked on her at 9, but Emma had a very particular relationship with bedtime that Cole had decided to pick his battles about. "Dad, you're supposed to be asleep." "I know, Mrs. Delgado's going to tell me. She's watching her shows." A pause. "I had that dream again." Cole set down the mop handle and walked to the supply closet where it was quiet. He sat on an overturned bucket. "The one with the ocean? The one where I can't run fast enough." Her voice was small. Not scared exactly, Emma rarely sounded scared, but smaller than her usual self. "I never get there in time in the dream." He knew the dream. She'd described it to him 4 or 5 times now. She was always trying to reach something or someone, and her legs didn't work right, and everything moved like she was underwater. You want to talk about it, or do you want me to tell you the one about the possum? Pause. Then quietly, the possum one. So he sat on the overturned bucket in the supply closet of the Whitmore Tower lobby and told his daughter the story of Hector the possum, who had been inventing and reinventing for 2 years now, a possum who kept getting into situations far above his pay grade and resolving them through a combination of stubbornness and dumb luck and the strategic use of playing dead. By the time Hector had accidentally become the deputy mayor of a small Florida town, Emma was laughing in that half-asleep way that meant she'd be out in minutes. "Love you, Bug," he said. "Love you too." A long pause. "Dad?" "Yeah. My chest hurt a little today. But just a little. Don't be worried." He kept his voice completely even. "Okay. Thank you for telling me. Don't be too worried," she amended, like she was calibrating something. "I won't be too worried." "Okay. Night, Em." He sat in the supply closet for another minute after she hung up. He looked at his hands, calloused in specific places from specific things, the kind of hands that had done specific work in specific places that he didn't let himself think about at 11 on a Tuesday night when his daughter's chest had. "Hurt a little today. Just a little. Don't be worried." He breathed in slowly. Out, in. Then he got up, went back to the mop, and finished the corridor. Sophia was still in her office at 1 in the morning. He knew because the lights on the 22nd floor were the only ones still burning, and because, when he came back through the lobby with the cleaning cart, he found her sitting on the low bench near the glass doors, shoes off, feet on the marble, holding a paper coffee cup with both hands like it was the only warm thing available. She looked up when she heard the cartwheels. That coffee came from the machine on the 2nd floor, Cole said, because he could see the cup. "There's a diner 2 blocks north that's open all night. Better coffee. Decent pie if it's been a good week." She looked at the cup. "I didn't know that. Most people in this building don't go 2 blocks north." She almost smiled at that. It was a careful almost, the kind that had forgotten what it was doing halfway through. "Long night?" he asked. It was a stupid question, and he knew it. She knew it too, judging by the look she gave him. "That's one word for it," she said. Cole started folding a drop cloth, giving her something else to look at, besides him paying attention to her. "My CFO," she said, apparently deciding something. "Man I hired 6 years ago. I trusted him with everything. Structure, finance, the whole machinery." She looked at the rain still coming down outside. "He's been working against me. I don't know for how long. I don't know how deep it goes. And everyone I'd normally talk to about something like this is connected to him." A short, humorless exhale. "So I'm sitting in my own lobby at 1 in the morning, drinking terrible coffee because I don't know what else to do." Cole set the drop cloth aside. "What does he want?" he asked. She looked at him. "The CFO," Cole said. "What does he want? Control of the company? Just the seat, or is there something else driving it?" Quiet for a moment. "He wants the company's direction to shift. We've been developing a medical technology cardiac applications early stage, but the data is strong. He thinks we're leaving money on the table by being too cautious about rollout. He wants to move faster than the safety data supports." She set the coffee down. "And apparently he's decided the fastest way to get that is to remove the obstacle. Which is you. Which is me." Cole looked at her for a long moment. She was telling a stranger this. She knew she was telling a stranger this. But she was doing it anyway, which told him something about how isolated she'd become inside the thing she'd built. "What's the technology?" he asked. Her eyes came up sharply. "You said cardiac applications," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Why?" Cole picked up the drop cloth again. "Good night, Ms. Whitmore." He pushed the cart toward the elevator. Behind him, he heard her shift on the bench. He didn't look back. But he was thinking about Emma's chest hurting. Just a little. Don't be worried. And he was thinking about a woman who'd built something that could matter to people like Emma, who was now sitting alone in her own lobby, while someone tried to take it away from her. He hit the elevator button. The door opened. He pushed the cart in. He thought, "Don't get involved." He thought, "You don't do that anymore." The doors closed. He looked at his reflection in the steel, a man in a gray uniform, pushing a cleaning cart at 1 in the morning, carrying things that no amount of mopping ever touched. And he thought about Boston. He thought about the number that kept him up at 3 in the morning. He thought about a 7-year-old girl who told her father not to be too worried, as if the calibration was something she could manage for him, as if worrying was something with a correct setting. The elevator rose. Cole stared at his own reflection. And the storm kept coming down outside, against the glass, against the city, patient and indifferent and loud. He didn't sleep well that night. That wasn't unusual. Cole had been a bad sleeper for years. The kind of bad that had nothing to do with comfort or noise, or the right pillow, and everything to do with a brain that treated the hours between 2 and 5 as an opportunity to run threat assessments on things he couldn't control. But that Wednesday morning was worse than most, because he kept coming back to the same loop. A woman in a charcoal blazer sitting alone in her own lobby, and a piece of medical technology she'd described in 2 sentences that had landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. He made Emma's lunch at 6:15. Peanut butter, no jelly. The crusts left on because Emma had recently decided crusts were fine actually, a position she'd arrived at through what she described as scientific testing, which meant she'd eaten them by accident twice and not died. He put a note in the bag, a small drawing he did every day, a different animal in a different situation. Nothing elaborate, just enough to make her laugh. Today's was Hector the possum wearing a tiny judge's wig. He wasn't sure the joke landed without context, but Emma had enough context by now. She came down the stairs at 6:40, looking like she'd fought the blankets and lost, hair going 4 directions, one sock on. Other sock, Cole said. I know, it's on the bathroom floor. I know. She disappeared back upstairs. He heard her moving around, then the particular sound of a 7-year-old finding a sock and regarding it as a personal inconvenience. Came back down wearing it wrong side out, which she would discover and correct at school, because some battles you really did leave for later. She ate her cereal standing at the counter, which he'd stopped arguing about, watching the rain that was still coming down outside, lighter now but persistent. Is it always going to rain, she asked. No, when does it stop? Today probably. Tomorrow for sure, she considered this. Okay. She finished the cereal, put the bowl in the sink without being asked. That was new. 2 weeks old, and he didn't comment on it because commenting had a way of making things self-conscious, and picked up her backpack. At the door, she stopped and looked at him over her shoulder. You look tired, she said. I'm fine. You look extra tired. I worked late. She studied him with the particular focus she got sometimes, a look that was too old for her face and that he recognized as something she'd inherited from him, whether either of them liked it. Then she said okay, and went out the door. He watched her go down the walkway and around the corner toward Mrs. Delgado's, who walked her to school on the mornings Cole had worked nights. He stood in the doorway until she was out of sight. Then he went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened his laptop. He looked up Whitmore Medical Technologies. It took him about 40 minutes to build the basic picture. He wasn't doing anything sophisticated, no access to anything that wasn't public, no tools beyond a browser, and the kind of reading comprehension that came from years of synthesizing intelligence reports in bad lighting under worse conditions. But public information, read carefully and in the right order, tells you more than most people realize. Whitmore Medical Technologies had been founded 11 years ago by Sophia Whitmore, then 22, using a combination of inherited capital and a seed investment from a Boston-based fund. The company's early focus was diagnostic software. By year 4, they'd pivoted, or more accurately, Sophia had pivoted. There were 2 board member departures around that time that the press had called strategic realignment into hardware, specifically a class of implantable cardiac monitoring devices that integrated with a proprietary data platform. The technology was genuinely interesting. Cole wasn't a medical professional, but he could read a summary, and what the company had developed was a device that didn't just monitor, it predicted. It tracked dozens of cardiac indicators simultaneously and used pattern recognition to flag deterioration before it became crisis. For patients with certain structural heart conditions, the kind that progressed quietly until they didn't, the kind that his daughter had, it represented something that the clinical trial summaries described carefully as a meaningful improvement in outcome probability. He sat with that for a minute. Then he kept reading. Adrian Cross had joined the company 6 years ago as CFO, recruited from a private equity firm where he specialized in medical device companies. His LinkedIn profile, still public, described him as a results-oriented financial strategist with deep expertise in scaling emerging medical technology. Cole had known men like Adrian Cross. Not this one specifically, but the category men who'd learned to dress their self-interest in the language of progress, who spoke fluently about innovation and disruption and value creation and meant, underneath all of it, A very simple thing, more faster mine. Financial picture was murkier, which was itself informative. Public filings showed healthy revenue growth, but a capital structure that had been rejiggered twice in the past 18 months in ways that required a forensic accountant to fully trace. Cole wasn't a forensic accountant, but he could see the shape of it: debt instruments that gave certain creditors, unusual control provisions, equity arrangements that had quietly shifted voting weight, board appointments in the past year that didn't obviously connect to Sophia's priorities. Someone had been doing patient, careful work. He closed the laptop. He sat at the kitchen table in the gray morning light and thought about a woman who had built something that mattered, who was now watching it being disassembled from the inside, who had sat in her own lobby at 1 a.m, telling a janitor about it because she'd run out of people to talk to. He thought about Emma, upstairs in her room right now with a one sock inside out and a drawing of Hector the possum judge in her lunch bag, whose heart worked harder than it should to do. Things hearts were supposed to do easily. He thought about Boston. He closed his eyes, breathed in, out. He was not going to do this. He was a man who mopped floors now. That was a choice he'd made deliberately, with full awareness of what he was setting aside. The alternative, going back to being the version of himself that solved problems with the specific skill set the Navy had spent years building into him, that version of himself had costs. It had a weight. It had a way of leaking into the rest of your life, into the way you looked at rooms and people and exits, into the distance it put between you and anyone you were trying to stay close to. Emma needed a father who was present, not a ghost in a body. He was not going to do this. He went to bed and stared at the ceiling for an hour, and then gave up and got up and made coffee and sat at the table again, and the laptop was right there, and he didn't open it. He lasted until noon. He went back to the tower that evening 40 minutes before his shift started. He asked Marcus in the security booth whether Ms. Whitmore was in. Marcus gave him a look. She's usually here by 5. Why? She left something in the lobby last night. It wasn't a lie exactly. She'd left the coffee cup, which he'd thrown away, but the principal was close enough to hold under casual inspection. Marcus shrugged. 22nd floor. You'd need to be announced. I know. Cole handed Marcus the folded piece of paper. Can you send that up? Marcus looked at the folded paper. What is it? A note. Another look. Then Marcus took it and made the call. The note had said, I looked into your company. I think you have a larger problem than you know. If you want to talk, same lobby, same time, your call. C. Mercer. He went and changed into his uniform and started the night. 12:40, she came through the lobby door from the elevator side, not the street. She'd been in the building the whole time, which meant she'd thought about it for 7 hours and decided yes. She walked up to where he was working and didn't say anything for a moment, just stood with her arms crossed, not hostile, more like she was cold and the crossing was just somewhere to put her arms. You looked into my company, she said. Public information. Took 40 minutes. And you've got a structural problem. The capital arrangements over the last 18 months, someone's been building leverage. If I had to guess, there are provisions in some of those debt instruments that allow creditor action if strict conditions are met. Performance triggers, maybe, or a change of control clause that could be activated if the board votes a certain way. He paused. Adrian Cross has been setting the conditions. She stared at him. How do you know that name? She said. He's your CFO. It's on your company website. I know that. I mean, how do you know it's him? I don't know it's him the way a lawyer would need to know it. I know it the way you know something when the shape of it is too deliberate to be coincidence. He looked at her. You already suspected him. That's why you said his name in the lobby last night. She uncrossed her arms, recrossed them, looked away, then back. Who are you? She asked. Not the same way she'd asked it last night, not sharp and curious. Sweeter this time. Like the question had a different weight now. Cole Mercer, he said, same as before. That's still just a name. He thought about it for a moment. Then former Navy SEAL. Did 12 years. I've been out for 6. He watched her register this. I took this job because it has health benefits, and it lets me be home when my daughter wakes up. The silence ran for a few seconds. How old is she? Sophia asked. 7. Something moved across her face that wasn't pity, it was more careful than that. Is she okay? She has a heart condition. There's a procedure that could fix it. It's in Boston and it's expensive, and we're working on it. He said it the way he'd learned to say it, flat and factual. No appeal in it, because he didn't want anyone's sympathy. He just wanted the facts to exist between them without pretending they didn't. Sophia was quiet for a moment, The cardiac monitoring technology we've developed, she said slowly, for patients with structural heart conditions. I know, Cole said. I read about it. She looked at him for a long time. He could see her thinking not the sharp, reactive thinking of a person managing a crisis, but something slower and more deliberate, kind that happened when someone was deciding how much to trust and running the numbers on what it would cost if they were wrong. What do you want? She asked. Nothing yet. I wanted you to know what I saw. What you do with it is your business. Why? He thought about Emma and the dream she kept having, the one where her legs didn't work right and she couldn't get there in time. He thought about the linoleum cold through his socks and Sarah at the kitchen table running numbers that hadn't added up. He thought about 12 years of doing a job that mattered, and then 6 years of trying to figure out if a man could be just one thing, or if the things you'd been stayed in you, whether you wanted them to or not. Because someone's trying to take something away from you that might matter to people it shouldn't be taken from, he said. And I don't do well with that. They met 3 more times in the lobby over the next 4 days. Not planned. Exactly, Cole never sought her out, but he also stopped pretending he didn't notice when she came down. On the second night, she brought 2 coffees from the diner 2 blocks north, which she'd apparently gone to find, and handed one to him, without making a thing of it, which he appreciated. She told him more on the third night. She'd started talking like she was thinking out loud, working through it in real time, and he'd found that if he just didn't interrupt, she'd eventually get to the part that mattered. The part that mattered was this. Adrian wasn't just positioning himself to take control of the company. He had a buyer. A large medical conglomerate based in Geneva. She didn't name them, but the way she said they told him she knew exactly who they were, and the knowing was unpleasant that had been circling Whitmore's technology for 2 years. They weren't interested in the cardiac monitoring platform as a diagnostic tool. They were interested in the data infrastructure underneath it, and they were interested in moving the device through regulatory approval, faster than the current clinical timeline allowed. Our Phase 2 data shows efficacy, Sophia said. But there are 3 adverse event flags that we're still characterizing. We believe they're manageable meaning we can design around them, modify the device parameters, take the time to understand what's happening before we put this in 50,000 people. That takes time. They don't want to take the time. And Adrian agrees with that position. Adrian thinks the adverse events are commercially manageable, which is a different thing. Her jaw was tight. He thinks the liability exposure is acceptable given the profit margin on the device. He ran the numbers on it, actually ran the numbers. She shook her head slowly. 6 years. I handed him 6 years of trust. Cole drank his coffee. What do you need? He asked. I need to know how far it goes. The board members he's got, I have suspicions. I don't have proof. I need communication records, financial arrangements, anything that shows coordination. If I go into that boardroom with just my word against his, I lose. He spent 6 years making sure I'd lose that fight. You need someone who can move inside the building without raising flags. She looked at him carefully. You already move inside the building. I do. And you know how she stopped, chose a different route. You've done investigation work before. Not corporate investigation. But the underlying skill set translates. Another silence. She put her coffee down on the lobby bench and turned to face him fully. I can help, Emma, she said. I want to be clear about what I mean. Not as this isn't a transaction. I'm not buying your help. But I have resources, and I have a medical technology division, and I have relationships with the best cardiac surgeons in this country. If Emma needs to get to Boston, I can make that happen. I can make sure cost is not the thing that stops her from getting what she needs. Her voice was steady and direct. I'm telling you this because I think you should know it before you decide anything. Not as leverage, just as the full picture. Cole looked at the rain against the glass. He thought about the number that woke him at 3 in the morning. He thought about Emma's cardiologist in her careful, measured tones. He thought about the GoFundMe that Denise had set up without asking, that had raised enough for one appointment. He thought about sitting on an overturned bucket in a supply closet, telling a story about a possum to help his daughter sleep. He thought about 12 years of a job he'd been genuinely good at, and what it meant that the skills were still there, even when he hadn't asked for them to be. I need to do this right, he said, carefully. Nothing that blows back on you before you're ready to use it. I know, and I need to be home when Emma wakes up. Doesn't change. That doesn't change, she agreed. He looked at her. She meant it, he could tell. He'd spent enough years reading people in high-pressure situations to know the difference between someone who was telling you what you needed to hear and someone who was telling you the truth, and Sophia Whitmore, whatever her complications, was telling him the truth. "Tell me everything you know about Adrian's access points," he said. "What systems he controls, what floors he works on, who he moves with. Give me the organizational chart and tell me which relationships you trust and which ones you're not sure about." She reached into her bag. She'd brought a bag tonight, he noticed, prepared, and pulled out a folded document. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. He spent the next 6 days building the picture, the way he'd been trained to incrementally, without urgency, patient as a man who understood that rushing intelligence work was the fastest way to compromise it. He learned Adrian Cross's patterns. The CFO arrived at 7:15 every morning and left between 7 and 9 at night, depending on his meeting load. He used the executive elevator exclusively. He had 2 offices, his official one on the 18th floor, and what the floor plan listed as a conference and hospitality suite on the 14th, that Sophia confirmed he'd claimed as an auxiliary workspace 3 years ago, a claim she'd thought nothing of at the time. The 14th floor suite was where he did his real work. Cole knew this the way he knew things not from evidence yet, but from pattern. A man running a long-term internal operation needed somewhere that wasn't his official space, somewhere that wasn't subject to the same level of traffic and observation. The 14th floor suite had its own server terminal, its own printer, and badge access that had been quietly reconfigured 14 months ago to exclude the executive assistant team. He found that last detail by having a conversation with a woman named Pam who'd worked facilities management for 9 years, and who talked while she worked, which most people did if you just listened without redirecting. "That floor's been weird since they redid the access," Pam said, not looking up from her equipment log. "Used to be we could go in for standard maintenance on a regular schedule. Now it's request only, and the requests get routed to Mr. Cross's office, not facilities." "Huh," Cole said, in the tone of someone who found this mildly interesting and nothing more. "I don't ask questions about what the executives do," Pam said, which meant she'd thought about it enough to decide not to. Cole moved on. He spent 2 nights on the building's physical infrastructure, the maintenance corridors, the server room access points, the camera coverage gaps that every building had because no facilities budget ever fully closed them. He built a map in his head, the way he'd built maps of other spaces in other contexts, marking what was observed and what was blind, what was logged and what was assumed to be logged but wasn't. On the 8th night, during a period when the 14th floor was unoccupied and the badge log would show only the standard janitorial pass, Cole had legitimate reason to make. He went in. He wasn't there to take anything. Not yet. He was there to understand the space, what it contained, how it was organized, where the things that mattered were likely to be. He moved through it methodically, the cleaning cart in the corridor as cover, spending no more time than the job required, touching nothing he didn't have reason to touch. But he saw enough. The whiteboard on the far wall had been erased, recently, the kind of erased where the ghost of the markers still sat in the weave of the board, if the light caught it right. Cole's light caught it right. He stood at the angle that showed him the ghost writing and what he could read without moving anything or photographing anything that would leave a trace. Names, dates, a sequence of board votes with projected outcomes marked beside them. A number, a very large number, and beside it a notation in shorthand that took him a moment to decode and then sat in his stomach like something cold. The notation, as best he could read it, was a timeline. Not for a corporate restructuring, for a transfer. He left the suite the way he'd entered it. Cart in the corridor. Door closed. Log unaltered. He pushed the cart to the service elevator and went back to the lobby level, and he stood in the service corridor for a moment with his hand flat against the concrete wall, just breathing. He'd suspected Adrian was moving against Sophia. He'd expected the standard machinery of a corporate takeover pressure, leverage, manufactured crises. He hadn't expected the timeline to be this far along. He hadn't expected the number on the board to be the size it was. And he hadn't expected the name he'd seen in the bottom corner of the erased whiteboard, small and faint but readable, a board member Sophia had told him she trusted. One of the 3 she'd said she was certain of. He stood in the corridor and recalculated everything. Then he took out his phone and sent Sophia a text. Just 4 words. "We need to talk tomorrow." Her response came back in under a minute. "I'll be in early." He put the phone away and finished his shift. He went home at 2:15, and Mrs. Delgado had left a note on the door saying Emma had eaten a good dinner and done her homework and gone to bed at 8:30, only 30 minutes late, which was practically early by recent standards. He went upstairs and stood in the doorway of Emma's room. She was asleep on her side, one arm around the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 2, her breathing slow and even in the dark. He stood there for longer than made practical sense, watching her breathe, feeling the particular gravity of it, the weight of a sleeping child in a world that kept being more complicated than it had any right to be. He thought about Geneva and about a board member he'd have to find a way to tell Sophia about tomorrow morning. He thought about the number on the whiteboard and what it meant for the timeline they were working against. He thought about the ghost writing in the erased board and the things Adrian Cross had been building, while no one was watching, patient and quiet and certain that the man mopping the floors would never look up. Cole turned off the hallway light. He went to his room, set his alarm, and lay on top of the covers, still dressed, because sometimes sleep was a thing that happened to you rather than something you chose, and tonight wasn't a night for choosing. Closed his eyes. His hands were still. He was already planning the next move. Sophia was already at her desk when Cole arrived at 7 the next morning, still in his civilian clothes, no cart, no uniform. He'd texted ahead. She'd left his name at the lobby security desk with instructions that read direct access, no escort required, which Marcus had relayed to him with a look that Cole didn't address. Coffee waiting. 2 cups, same diner cups as before, which told him she'd gone down and gotten them herself rather than asking anyone, which told him she understood, without being told, that fewer people needed to know about this conversation. He sat across from her desk and told her what he'd seen on the 14th floor. He was precise about it, what he could confirm, what he was inferring, and where the line between those two things sat. He didn't editorialize. He gave her the information in the order that would let her build the picture herself, because people process things they'd constructed better than things they'd been handed. She was quiet through most of it. When he got to the board member's name, Raymond Holt, a man she'd described as a 20-year relationship, a friend of her father's who'd stayed on the board through 2 leadership transitions, she went very still. "Say that again," she said. His name was in the corner of the board. Small. Could have been a note about reaching out. Could have been a confirmation. I can't tell you which, but it was there. Sophia set down her coffee cup carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are doing something your face isn't supposed to show. "Raymond," she said. Not to Cole. Just the name out loud in the room. "I'm sorry," Cole said. She shook her head once, a small, sharp motion. "Don't be. I need to know." She looked at the window, at the city still gray and damp from the week's rain. "How far along is the timeline? Based on what I could read, 3 weeks. Maybe less. There's a board meeting scheduled for the 30th, and I think that's the target. Whatever Adrian's built, he plans to bring it to a vote at that meeting. If he's got the votes lined up," Sophia Cole stopped. "I know what happens if he's got the votes." Her voice was flat. Not emotionless. More like emotion had been compressed into something she could work with. The change of control provisions activate. The Geneva buyers come in under the new leadership, and the clinical timeline gets accelerated. Those adverse events you mentioned. The 3 flags. They get managed, she said, with a bitterness that didn't suit the word. Commercially managed. Cole leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees. "I need to get into his actual files. The whiteboard was a map, the files are the territory. We need documentation. Emails, financial transfers, whatever he's used to coordinate with the board members and with the buyers. Without that, you have a story. With it, you have a case. He'd have encrypted everything. Probably. But encryption doesn't help if the files are accessed from a logged terminal during a period when Adrian's access card shows him somewhere else in the building. Clean copy, pulled correctly through your own IT infrastructure, that's discoverable under your internal governance rules. You have authority to order an audit. I can't order an audit without tipping him off. The moment I make that move, he accelerates the timeline. Not if the audit is framed as something routine. Your annual security review. You can create a reason." She looked at him for a long moment. "You've done this kind of thing before. Different context. Same mechanics, operations," she said quietly. "You ran operations." He didn't confirm or deny that specifically. "I understand how people protect information and how those protections fail. And I know how to move inside a space without changing what it looks like." She nodded slowly. "I have one person in it I trust completely. Her name is Janet Reyes. She's been with me since the first year. Adrian's never brought her inside, whatever he's doing, I think, because she's technically staff, not executive, and he doesn't think she matters. A pause. He underestimates a lot of people. Can you bring her in quietly? I need someone who can pull logs and initiate a system-level review without flagging it through the channels Adrian monitors. I can do that today. Give me until tonight to map the 14th floor properly. I need to know what terminal he's working from, whether it's networked to the main system or air-gapped, and what his typical access window is. She looked at him steadily. Cole. Yeah. If he finds out you're doing this, she stopped. Chose a different way in. He's not a man who responds to things with confrontation. He's patient and he's methodical, and he hurts people in ways that don't leave obvious marks. I know the type. I'm not sure you know this type. He's been doing this a long time. He's very good at finding the thing that matters most to a person. She held his gaze. He knows you work here. He knows your name. If he hasn't already looked into you. He has, Cole said. I'd be disappointed if he hadn't. Stared at him. If I were running his operation, Cole said, I'd have background on every regular building employee within 2 weeks of starting. It's basic. He knows I'm former military. He knows I'm a single father. He knows I've been working this job for 8 months. What he doesn't know, what he can't know from the outside, is what I can actually do. He looked at my job title and stopped reading. He paused. People like Adrian Cross are very good at seeing what confirms what they already think. I'm a janitor. I clean floors. That's what he sees. Sophia was quiet for a moment. And that's what you're counting on. That's what I'm counting on. He went home, slept 4 hours, picked Emma up from school, and spent the afternoon being her father. That was the word he used in his head. Deliberately being, as in actively, as in present tense and intentional, not just physically in the same space, but actually there. They sat at the kitchen table, and she told him about a disagreement she'd had with her friend Maisie over the correct classification of whether a hot dog was a sandwich, a position Emma held with the ferocity of a small prosecutor. It's not a sandwich, Emma said. Why not? Because it doesn't feel like a sandwich. Feelings aren't taxonomy. She looked at him blankly. What's taxonomy? The system for classifying things. Like how scientists decide what category something belongs to. She considered this. Okay, but feelings are data. He looked at her. Where did you hear that? I made it up. She seemed pleased with herself. Am I right? You're partially right, in a way that's going to cause problems for you in a formal debate. I'm not doing a formal debate. I'm arguing with Maisie. Fair enough. He got up to start dinner. What did Maisie say? She said it's a sandwich because it has bread and filling. And I said that by that logic, a burrito is a sandwich, and she said that's different. And I said how, and she said she didn't know, but it just was. And I said that's not an argument. Emma paused. I think I was kind of mean about it. Cole kept his back to her, so she didn't see him working to keep his face straight. You might want to tell her that tomorrow. That I was mean. That you were too hard on her. You can still be right about the hot dog and wrong about how you said it. A long silence. He heard her kick her feet against the chair rung, the particular rhythm of a kid sitting with something uncomfortable. Yeah, she said finally. Okay. He made pasta, the one Emma called the orange one, because he made it with a tomato butter sauce that came out slightly orange, and they ate at the table, and she told him about a book she was reading. And he listened, actually listened, tracked the plot, and asked questions and let the evening be just the evening. After she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table for a while. He thought about the board meeting on the 30th. He counted days, 19. Maybe less, if Adrian had reason to move faster. Then he thought about Emma's cardiac appointment next week, which he'd moved twice already for scheduling reasons and couldn't move again. He thought about Dr. Paulson in Boston and the number and the GoFundMe. He thought about what Sophia had said, I can make sure cost is not the thing that stops her, and the way she'd said it, direct and without theater. He was not a man who accepted things easily. He'd been raised, and then trained to solve his own problems with his own hands, and anything that looked like dependency felt like a trap even when it wasn't. He knew that about himself. He'd been working on it since Emma was born, because Emma needed a father who could receive help gracefully, not just give it. He sat at the table for another hour, then went to bed. He was up at 10:30, in the building by 11, and in his uniform, and moving through the 14th floor corridor by midnight. It took 3 nights to get what they needed. Janet Reyes, Sophia's IT person, turned out to be a compact, precise woman of about 40 who communicated primarily through short sentences and who When Cole explained what he needed from a technical standpoint, asked two questions, nodded twice, and said, "Give me 48 hours." She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what was going on. She'd apparently spent 6 years watching Adrian Cross move through the company's IT infrastructure in ways that she found professionally offensive, and Cole had the sense that this was not a task she found difficult to commit to. What she found when she got in was worse than either of them had anticipated. The coordination with the Geneva buyers wasn't new, it went back 4 years. Adrian had been in contact with them since before Sophia had even known the company was on anyone's acquisition radar. He'd been feeding them technical data, proprietary data, covered under the company's confidentiality framework for at least 2 years, framed as consultative engagement, but far exceeding what any consulting arrangement would cover. He'd been providing them detailed analysis of the adverse event flags, not as safety concerns but as liability projections. Here's what the exposure looks like. Here's what it costs to manage it post-launch. Here's the number at which the profit margin still holds. He'd run the math on the acceptable cost of harm. He had it in a document, formatted and dated and saved to a folder he'd titled, with a particular kind of audacity, Strategic Risk Framework. Janet printed it and put it in a plain manila envelope and gave it to Cole in the lobby on the second night, with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but somewhere in between. "There are families in the Phase 2 trial," she said. "People who've had this device implanted. If they push the commercial rollout without addressing those flags." "I know," Cole said. He knows too. That's the part that she stopped. "I've been in IT for 20 years. I've seen companies cut corners. I've never seen someone actually do the math on this." Cole took the envelope. "Thank you, Janet." She looked at him for a moment. "Who are you, actually?" "Someone who didn't want to get involved," he said, and then did anyway. She nodded like that made sense and walked away. Cole brought the envelope to Sophia the following morning, same as before, coffee already on the desk. She went through the documents page by page. He watched her the way he watched things, without hovering, just present, available if needed, not in the way. She went through most of it without expression. When she got to the Strategic Risk Framework document, she stopped. She read it. Then she turned it face down on the desk and put both hands flat on top of it, palms down, and looked at the wall for what might have been 30 seconds. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Cole said. She turned back. Her eyes were clear. "I need to call my legal team. Not the firm we've used, they have conflicts. I have a contact, a litigator I went to school with, who does whistleblower and securities work. She'll know what to do with this. Before you make that call, Adrian can't know you have this. The moment he knows, he'll move on whatever contingency he's built. You need to get ahead of it before he has a chance to react." "How long do I have?" "I don't know. Days, probably. The 30th is still the most likely target, but if something tips him off..." "I understand." She gathered the documents carefully. "Cole, I need you to know whatever happens next, whether this works or it doesn't, what you've done here." She stopped. She wasn't a woman who struggled with words. He'd noticed that. She was fast and precise in conversation. The struggling meant she was working on something real. "You didn't have to do this. Emma needed the help," he said. "You needed the help. Those two things happened to align. That's very practical. I'm a practical person." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. It had several things in it at once, the way real expressions do. "I'm going to keep my promise," she said. "That's not contingent on outcome. Whatever happens with the company, Emma gets what she needs. I've already spoken with a colleague at the Boston Center doctor. Ellison, he's the best person in the country for her specific condition. We can get her in for a consultation next week if you want." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I want." He was back on shift that evening when the call came. He didn't recognize the number. He almost didn't answer. He was in the middle of the East Corridor, and the rule was phone calls waited unless it was Emma's school or Mrs. Delgado's number. But something made him look at it twice. And something about the prefix, a downtown exchange he associated with the building's administrative lines, made him step into the service alcove and pick up. "Mr. Mercer." The voice was smooth, professionally warm in the way of someone who'd practiced warmth until it became a tool. "I think it's time we spoke directly. My name is Adrian Cross." Cole said nothing. He leaned against the wall of the alcove and breathed. "I know you're there," Adrian said, "and I think you know who I am. So let's skip the part where we pretend otherwise." A pause. "You've been busy." Still nothing from Cole. "I'm going to say something, And I need you to hear it as the practical offer it is rather than a threat, because it's genuinely not a threat. Adrian's voice stayed even, measured, the voice of a man who dealt in controlled environments. You found some things. I understand that. I've been in this business a long time, and sometimes people find things. What matters is what happens next. What happens next, Cole said. You're a smart man. Clearly smarter than your employment file suggests, which I'll be honest, I should have looked more carefully. My mistake. The admission came easily, like he'd decided it cost him nothing. Here's what I want to offer. You walk away from whatever arrangement you have with Sophia. You leave the documents where they are, or rather, in whatever state they currently exist, and you don't take any further action. In exchange, your daughter gets everything she needs. Not through Sophia's channels, through mine. Privately, quickly, with no strings and no record of this conversation. Cole felt something very cold settle through him. Not surprised he'd known something like this, was coming from the moment he'd taken the envelope from Janet. But knowing something is coming and feeling it arrive are two different things. Emma, he said. Your daughter. Adrian's voice didn't change. 7 years old. Structural cardiac anomaly. Candidate for corrective surgery at the Boston Cardiac Center, specifically the procedure doctor. Ellison specializes in. I know her case. I made it my business to know her case. Another pause, deliberate. I want to be very clear, Mr. Mercer. This is not a threat against your daughter. I would never, that would be monstrous, and I'm not a monster. I'm offering to help her. Immediately. Fully. No conditions beyond your withdrawal from a situation that doesn't need to involve you. Cole stood very still in the service alcove. The corridor was empty in both directions. And if I don't withdraw? He said. For the first time, the warmth in Adrian's voice changed slightly, not to anger. Nothing so uncontrolled as that. More like weather shifting. Then things become complicated. For everyone. Your background gets examined carefully. The arrangement you've built with Ms. Whitmore, it starts to look like something less than professional. There are ways to frame what you've been doing in this building, with access you weren't authorized to have, that become very difficult to explain to the relevant authorities. He let that sit for a moment. And complicated situations have a way of affecting the people around us. I don't want that. I genuinely don't want that. But complicated situations have their own momentum once they start. Cole looked at his own hand, flat against the corridor wall. Calused in the specific places. Steady. He thought about Emma asleep in her room, one arm around the elephant, breathing slow and even. He thought about Raymond Holt's name in the corner of an erased whiteboard. He thought about a strategic risk framework document and the math that had been done on the acceptable cost of harm. He thought about families in a Phase 2 trial with a device in their chests and a man in Geneva who didn't want to wait for the safety data. He thought about 12 years of a job he'd been good at, and the one thing that job had taught him above everything else, the moment you abandon someone, because the cost of staying gets personal, you haven't protected anyone. You've just bought yourself a delay on a thing you'll have to face anyway, and you'll face it having already sold the part of yourself that knew better. No, Cole said, a pause. Mr. Mercer, no deal. I'm not walking away. The warmth was entirely gone now. What was left was something flatter and more precise. Think about what you're choosing. I have thought about it. Your daughter, my daughter, Cole said, and his voice was very quiet, is the reason I can't walk away. Because she's going to grow up in the world you're building if people like me look the other way. And I'd rather she grow up broke and healthy in a world where someone tried to stop that than comfortable in one where I sold her out to fund it. He paused. Don't call this number again. He ended the call. He stood in the service alcove for a long moment. Then he called Sophia. She picked up on the second ring. Cole. He knows, Cole said. He just called me. I don't know how much he knows the call was designed to feel like more than it was. That's a technique. Make the target feel fully exposed before they know what's actually been uncovered. But he's aware that something's happened. How long do we have? Hours, not days. You need to make that call to your litigator tonight. A brief silence. Did he threaten you? He offered me a deal. Another silence longer. Cole, I told him no. Make the call, Sophia. We're past the planning stage. The next 12 hours were the longest Cole had spent outside of a war zone. Sophia's litigator, a woman named Carol Brandt, who answered her phone at 11 at night with the alert efficiency of someone for whom 11 at night was a normal working hour, had reviewed the documents by 1 in the morning and began making her own calls by 2. By 5, there were 2 regulatory attorneys, a securities litigator, and a former SEC investigator on a conference call that Cole was not on, but that Sophia messaged him about in brief, clipped updates. Carol says the documents are strong. The Geneva correspondence alone is potentially criminal. Then 20 minutes later, Raymond is cooperating. He called Sophia himself. He's been in over his head for 8 months and apparently looking for a way out. Then Adrian knows we've moved. Carol got a call from his lawyer at 3 a.m. Cole sat in his kitchen with his phone on the table and drank coffee and waited. Emma slept upstairs, unaware misses. Delgado had texted to ask if he needed her to take Emma to school. He'd asked without explaining. And Denise had said yes without asking, because that was the kind of neighbor she was, and he'd never adequately told her what that meant to him. 15, Sophia called. He's making a move on the documents, she said. He's arguing through his lawyer that the retrieval was unauthorized and the files are inadmissible. Carol expected this. She says it's a delay tactic. He's trying to create enough legal noise to call the board meeting before we can use the evidence effectively. Can he do that? He can try. Carol says the governance argument is weak. You were moving under my authority as CEO, and the internal audit framework covers this. But it buys him time, and time is what he needs. Cole stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. The morning was clear for the first time in days. The city washed pale gold and clean in the early light. He's going to move on the board meeting, Cole said. Try to call it early, before the 30th. Carol thinks the same. She's filing a temporary injunction this morning to freeze the corporate voting process pending the investigation. If the judge grants it, when does she file? 9 o'clock. That gives him 3 hours. Yes. Cole watched the light on the city. He thought about the whiteboard on the 14th floor, the patient careful work of years, the names and dates and laid out by a man who'd been certain, genuinely certain, that no one was paying enough attention to stop him. Carol also wants to speak with you directly, Sophia said. She has questions about how you access the 14th floor suite. She wants to understand the exposure before Adrian's lawyers try to use it. I'll talk to her, Cole. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but less operational. I need to say something. Okay, when he called you last night, whatever he offered you didn't have to say no. You could have, I would have understood. Cole was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. But you did anyway. Yeah, she didn't say anything after that. She didn't need to, and he wouldn't have known what to do with it if she had. Some things didn't need to be made into sentences to be understood between two people. I'll be there at 9, Cole said. For Carol's call. I'll have coffee. Same diner. Same diner, she said. And he could hear something in it, not quite a smile, not quite not one either. He went upstairs and sat on the edge of Emma's bed and looked at his daughter sleeping. The elephant under her arm, the small rise and fall of her breathing, the way the morning light came through the gap in the curtains and lay across the blanket in a narrow, warm bar. He reached out and put his hand gently on her shoulder, just rested it there, barely touching, not enough to wake her. Stirred slightly, shifted, and said without opening her eyes, Dad. Go back to sleep. Kay, she settled again. A few seconds passed. You okay? I'm okay. Kay, she said again, and her breathing deepened and she was gone. He sat there another minute. Then he got up, got changed, and went to meet what was coming. Carol Brandt was not what Cole had expected, which he recognized immediately as his own assumption problem. He'd built a picture from the phone manner, brisk, authoritative, the kind of voice that didn't waste syllables, expected someone who looked the part in an obvious way. What he got was a small woman in her mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a coffee stain on the cuff of her jacket that she'd either not noticed or decided wasn't worth addressing, who looked at him when he walked into Sophia's office and said, You're the janitor. I was, Cole said. Technically still are, until Sophia resolves your employment situation, which matters legally, so don't quit. She pointed at the chair across from her. Sit down. I have 40 minutes before I need to be at the courthouse, and I need to understand exactly what you did and exactly how you did it. He sat. He told her. He was precise about it, same precision he'd used with Sophia, same distinction between confirmed and inferred, same clear accounting of every space he'd entered and every object he'd touched or not touched. Carol listened without interrupting, which was a skill not everyone had. She took notes in a handwriting that looked like shorthand but wasn't any system he recognized, probably her own. When he finished, she looked at her notes for a moment. The terminal Janet pulled from you identified it. She executed the retrieval. Correct. and your access to the 14th floor suite was covered by the standard janitorial authorization for that corridor. Corridor, yes. The suite itself is a gray area. The access was technically within the janitorial badge parameters, but the suite's reconfigured access should have excluded it. The reconfiguration wasn't properly logged in the facilities system, which is why the corridor authorization still worked. Carol looked at him over the top of her glasses. Adrian's team is going to argue you exploited an administrative gap to access a space you weren't authorized to enter. They can argue that. And how do you respond to that argument? I respond that the reconfiguration was never properly approved through facilities management, which means it doesn't legally supersede the standard access framework. Pam in facilities can confirm the reconfiguration was done without proper authorization, which means the suite was under the actual documented protocols within my authorized access area. Pause. You thought this through. I thought it through. Carol looked at Sophia, who was standing near the window with her arms crossed, and the expression of someone who was letting someone else run the room because that was the right call, not because she didn't have opinions. He's right, Carol said. It's not airtight, nothing is, but it's defensible, and more importantly, it shifts the narrative. Adrian's team trying to argue the documents are inadmissible because of how they were retrieved opens a door we want open because it invites examination of why the suite's access was reconfigured without authorization in the first place. She capped her pen. They file to suppress. We argue the reconfiguration itself was an act in furtherance of the scheme. Suddenly, the legal question is about what Adrian was hiding, not how it was found. When does the injunction get filed? Cole asked. 8:55. Judge Kaufman's docket. She's not someone who grants these lightly, but the documentation is strong, and I've argued in front of her before. Carol stood, gathered her papers into a bag that had seen better years. Sophia, if Adrian's lawyers contact you directly before noon today, you say nothing, and you call me. Cole, she looked at him. Stay available. I may need you this afternoon. I'll be here. She nodded, put her glasses back in her face, and walked out. Her coffee stain went with her. Sophia waited until the door closed. Then she exhaled, not dramatically, just a long, controlled breath, the kind that means someone has been holding something and decided to set it down for a moment. She's good, Cole said. She's the best I know. Sophia turned from the window. She was 2 years ahead of me in law school. I switched to business in my second year, and she never entirely forgave me for abandoning what she called a vocation. A brief pause that might, in different circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. She's been waiting 11 years to represent me in something. Does she know that? She absolutely knows that. Sophia sat down at her desk and looked at the surface of it, the documents. The copies Carol had taken copies of, the manila envelope that had traveled through 3 sets of hands in the past 36 hours. Cole, I need to tell you something about the board. Raymond Holt is cooperating, he said. You texted that. Raymond is cooperating, yes. He called me at 4 a.m. He sounded terrible. She paused. He's 72 years old. He was my father's friend for 30 years. He got into this thinking. It was a financial restructuring discussion, that Adrian was presenting a legitimate alternative to the company's direction. He says he didn't know about the Geneva arrangement or the safety data manipulation until he was already in too deep to see a clean way out. Do you believe him? She was quiet for a moment. I believe that's the story he's told himself. Whether it's entirely accurate, whether at some point he knew more than he's admitting and kept going anyway, I don't know. I may never know. Her voice was measured, but he's willing to provide a full account to Carol and to regulatory investigators, and that matters more right now than what I believe about his intentions. Cole nodded. How many of the board does that leave against you? 2 who were actively coordinating with Adrian. 3 who weren't involved, but who'd been persuaded that the Geneva deal was commercially sound, and were likely to vote for the leadership change based on that. With Raymond flipped, the math changes. She looked at him directly. If Carol gets the injunction, the board meeting can't proceed. The investigation opens formally. The weight of the documentation, the Geneva correspondence, the strategic risk framework becomes public record through the regulatory process. And at that point, the 2 active members have their own exposure to worry about. They stop being a block. And Adrian. Something moved across her face. Carol thinks there's criminal exposure on the security side. The data transfers to Geneva proprietary technical information sold to a prospective acquirer while he's actively managing internal financial structures. That's not just a corporate governance violation. That's potentially wire fraud. Cole sat with that for a moment. He's not going to let it happen quietly. No, he's not. She leaned back slightly. He spent 6 years building this. He's methodical, he's patient, and he doesn't quit when he's cornered, he escalates. Carol knows that. She told me this morning that the filing is going to trigger a response, and the response will be fast and probably ugly. She paused. I'm prepared for that. Are you? She looked at him. No, she said. But I'm going anyway. The injunction was granted at 11:14 that morning. Cole got the text from Sophia while he was in his car in the parking structure, having gone home briefly to check on things and come back a strange in-between state of being neither fully off shift nor on it, just available, which was a posture he recognized from deployments. You didn't sleep deeply when something was unresolved. You rested light and you stayed close to the thing. Carol filed additional documents with the SEC's regional office by noon. By 1 in the afternoon, 2 things happened in quick succession. First, Adrian Cross's attorney sent a 14-page letter to Sophia's legal team that Carol described, in a text to Cole that he gathered was meant to share only the summary, as aggressive but disorganized, which means they're rattled. Second, a financial journalist with a reputation for breaking corporate governance stories received what appeared to be a selectively curated package of documents that had clearly come from Adrian's camp framing Cole's Alice SS of the 14th. Floor suite as corporate espionage orchestrated by Sophia to manufacture evidence against a whistleblowing CFO. Sophia called Cole when the story started circulating on financial news aggregators. It's moving fast, she said. Her voice was controlled but tight in a way he hadn't heard before. The framing is, he's positioned himself as the one trying to protect the company's integrity. He's calling the safety data concerns standard regulatory risk management. He's calling the Geneva relationship a prospective partnership properly disclosed at the executive level, and he's calling you a pause. He's calling you a former military operative with a documented history of unauthorized entry, deployed by a CEO who'd lost board confidence and was acting outside her authority. Cole looked at the parking structure ceiling. Documented history. He filed a complaint this morning with the city's commercial property board, claiming unauthorized access to secured areas on multiple occasions. It's Cole. It will get picked up. It's the kind of thing that generates a headline even before it's been examined. He's trying to bury the real story under a louder one. Yes. Can Carol respond? She's already drafting. But the problem is timing. A correction takes longer than an accusation. The accusation lands first, and people remember the first thing. Her voice dipped slightly, not breaking. Sophia Whitmore didn't break easily, but something in it acknowledged the weight of what was happening. He's good at this. He's been planning a response since before we even moved. He had this ready. Cole thought for a moment. The trial participants, he said. What? The families in the Phase 2 cardiac trial. People with the device implanted. You said there were 3 adverse event flags. You were characterizing, does anyone outside the company know about those flags? Any of the trial participants? Pause. The trial participants received standard disclosure about reported adverse events under the trial protocol. Specific flags, Cole found the pattern we identified, no. They've been reported to the Device Review Committee, but not to the participants directly. We were still characterizing. If those participants were informed, not scared, informed given real information about what the company was trying to protect versus what Adrian's camp was trying to accelerate, that's not just a legal story anymore. That's a story about people. Real ones, with names. Another pause longer. That's a significant step, Sophia said carefully. Reaching out to trial participants outside the formal regulatory notification process. Carol needs to advise on whether. I know, I'm not saying do it today. I'm saying it's the move that reframes the narrative if Adrian's version gains traction. His story is about a CEO and a janitor. It's a corporate drama. The moment it becomes about families, it changes what kind of story it is. He paused. Carol should know that option exists. Silence. Then, you think like someone who's run information operations. I think like someone who's been in situations where the ground shifts, and you have to find what's actually load-bearing. He heard her breathe. I'll tell Carol. She'll hate that you thought of it before she did. She'll use it anyway. Yes, Sophia said. She will. Story ran at 2:15. By 3, it had been picked up by 4 financial outlets. By 4, it had migrated to 2 general news aggregators with the particular velocity that stories get when they have a clean villain and victim shape, and the shape Adrian had built was clean, powerful CEO, Disloyal operative. Manufactured evidence. Legitimate executive forced out. Cole read the version on his phone in the kitchen. Emma at school, apartment quiet. He read it twice. He noted what it got wrong and what it got partially right and what it had clearly been fed directly. He noted the quotes attributed to unnamed sources inside the company, quotes that had the specific texture of things Adrian had said in that late-night phone call, dressed up and laundered through a second party. He put his phone down on the table and sat with it. He was not, by nature, a man who cared much what strangers thought of him. He'd lived too long inside institutions that valued what you could actually do over what people said about it to have developed much sensitivity to reputation as an abstract thing. But there was a specific quality to reading yourself described as a weapon someone else had deployed, to seeing your own actions reframed as sinister by a man who'd spent 6 years planning to hurt people that sat differently than he'd expected. It didn't make him angry exactly. It made him tired. Particular tiredness of watching something real get replaced by something constructed, and knowing the constructed version would travel faster. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize, a different one from Adrian's call the night before, which told him Adrian used multiple lines, which told him something about the infrastructure around him. He let it ring. It stopped. Then a text from the same number, last chance for a conversation. After today, this gets harder for everyone, especially the people around you. Cole looked at the text for a long moment. Then he blocked the number, picked up his phone, and called Carol Brandt. She answered on the first ring. I was about to call you. Text from the secondary number. We need to document everything he sends you. Screenshot, timestamp, don't delete anything. The sound of papers moving. His lawyers sent us a second letter an hour ago. They're threatening a defamation suit against you specifically, not Sophia, based on the access to the suite and statements they claim you made to building staff about Adrian's activities. I didn't make statements to building staff, I know. They'll claim Pam from facilities and someone in IT received characterizations from you that damaged Adrian's professional reputation. It's thin, and they know it's thin. This is noise generation, not a real legal threat. But it requires response time, and response time is what they're buying. The trial participants, Cole said. Did Sophia talk to you about? She did. 40 minutes ago. A brief pause. You were right. I hate that you were right, because it should have been my idea, but you were right. I've already spoken with the lead clinical investigator for the trial. Under the trial safety monitoring protocol, there's a participant notification obligation if the adverse event pattern reaches a certain threshold. I'm arguing that the pattern we've documented, combined with evidence of intentional suppression by the CFO, meets that threshold. If I'm right, notification goes out through official channels, which is cleaner legally than anything we'd initiate ourselves. Another pause. Those notifications go out. The story changes. You can't run a rogue CEO narrative against a backdrop of trial participants asking why they weren't told about safety flags. How long? The clinical investigator is reviewing tonight. If she agrees with my threshold argument, the notification process starts within 48 hours. Paper sounds. Cole, I need to ask you something directly. Okay. Adrian's lawyers are going to depose you if this goes to litigation. They're going to go through your military record, your discharge, your post-service history, everything. They're going to look for anything that makes you look unstable, compromised, or motivated by something other than what you've said. A pause. Is there anything I need to know before they find it? Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, a pigeon was working at something on the fire escape railing with single-minded persistence. My discharge is honorable, he said. My record is clean. My post-service history is I had a hard couple of years after my wife died. I wasn't in legal trouble, but I had some months that weren't great. Nothing documented beyond a counseling referral through the VA. He paused. I'm not a perfect person, Carol. I made choices in the military I live with, but nothing that gives them what they're looking for. The counseling referral, it was grief counseling. After Emma's mother died. I wasn't functioning well for a while, and my VA contact pushed me to talk to someone. He paused. I went 4 times, and then I stopped going, because I found it easier to be functional when I was focused on Emma rather than myself, which my therapist told me was a coping strategy with diminishing returns, and she was probably right, but there it is. Carol was quiet for a moment. That's not a vulnerability. That's a human being. She wrote something. Okay, thank you for telling me. Is there anything else you need from me today? Be available. Don't talk to journalists. Don't talk to anyone from the company who isn't Sophia or Janet. And if Adrian contacts you again, any number, any channel, document it and send it to me immediately. Understood. One more thing. Her voice shifted slightly, the professional briskness dropping half a register. What you did. Going back to Sophia last night after that call, when he'd offered you a clear exit. With your daughter's situation, a lot of people would have taken that deal. I know. I'm not saying you made the wrong call. I'm saying I understand what it cost. A pause. Keep that close. Because before this is over, you're going to have days where the cost feels larger than the principal. And on those days, you need to remember that you looked at it clearly and decided anyway. Cole looked at the pigeon on the fire escape, still working at whatever it had found. I'll remember, he said. Emma came home at 3:30 with a drawing she'd made in art class, a house with a very large sun, and 3 figures standing in front of it that she explained were herself, Cole, and Gerald the horse from the drawings he put in her lunchbox, who she had apparently decided was a permanent family member. Cole put it on the refrigerator next to Hector the possum. Emma sat at the kitchen table and did her homework with the particular attitude of a child who found homework a necessary inconvenience and was managing it. Cole made dinner. He kept his phone face down on the counter and dealt with it only when it buzzed with something from Carol or Sophia, which happened twice, once to confirm the SEC had formally acknowledged the filing, and once to say that a second board member had reached out to Carol directly, apparently having decided that cooperation was preferable to exposure. After dinner, Emma looked at him across the table. You're being quiet, she said. I'm always quiet. Different quiet. Like you're thinking loud. He looked at his daughter. She had pasta sauce on her chin and she didn't know it, and he almost told her and then didn't because she looked so serious, and it felt wrong to break the moment. I'm dealing with some things at work, he said. The building work? Yeah. She considered this. Is it the mean kind of things or the hard kind? He looked at her. What's the difference? Mean things are when someone does something bad on purpose. Hard things are when something is just hard. They feel different. She wiped her mouth, got most of the sauce. You feel like both. He sat with that. She wasn't wrong, and the fact that she wasn't wrong at 7 years old and with pasta sauce on her chin was the kind of thing that hit differently than you expected. Yeah, he said. Both. She nodded like she'd confirmed something. Are you going to be okay? I'm going to be okay.
Are you sure?
Pretty sure. Okay. She picked up her fork again. Can we have the orange pasta tomorrow too? We can have it tomorrow too. He cleared the table and she went upstairs, and he washed dishes by hand the way he always did, because the dishwasher had been broken for 3 months, and he kept meaning to call the super about it and kept not doing it. And standing at the sink with hot water and something mindless to do was actually one of the better parts of an evening. His phone buzzed on the counter. Sophia Adrian just held a press conference. He dried his hands, picked up the phone. What did he say? He announced he's filing a formal shareholder complaint alleging mismanagement and evidence fabrication. He's calling for an emergency board session, independent of the injunction, arguing the injunction itself was obtained fraudulently. He had 3 of our largest institutional investors on camera with him. Pause, then another message. Cole, he's very good at this. Cole read it twice. So are you. Call Carol. Already on with her. A longer pause. He said something at the end of the press conference. He said, I'm going to quote this directly. He said, the individuals Ms. Whitmore has chosen to involve in this dispute, including a troubled former serviceman with a personal financial crisis, demonstrate a troubling lack of judgment that the board must consider. Cole read that twice as well. A troubled former serviceman with a personal financial crisis. He knew what it was. It was a thing Adrian had calculated would land not as a legal argument but as a picture, a type, a suggestion planted in the mind of anyone reading quickly. Unstable, desperate, used. He'd taken the most honest parts of Cole's life and reframed them as weaknesses, and done it publicly and with the specific confidence of someone who'd never had to be the thing they were describing. Cole put the phone down on the counter. He stood at the kitchen sink, looking out the small window above it, at the strip of street visible between 2 buildings, the evening light going amber on the pavement, a woman walking a dog, an ordinary Wednesday continuing to be ordinary around the edges of everything that was happening in the center of it. He breathed. Then he picked up his phone and typed, He's trying to make you doubt the decision to involve me. Don't. Her response came back fast. I don't. Good. What do you need from me tonight? A pause. Then, Carol wants you to write a formal account of every interaction every night in the building. Every conversation, every access. Dated, sequential, factual. She wants it in her hands by morning. I'll have it to her by midnight. He sat down at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad he still thought better on paper, had since his SEAL days when field reports were handwritten before they were typed, and started writing. He was precise and sequential, and he didn't editorialize. Date, time, action, observation. The first night in the lobby, the coffees from the diner, the conversations that had built something he hadn't named and wasn't going to name right now because there was work to do. The 14th floor, Janet, the manila envelope. The phone call from Adrian. The text from the secondary number. He wrote for 2 hours. Emma came downstairs once, got a glass of water, looked at him writing, and went back up without asking, which was the kind of reading the room she'd gotten good at in ways that made him proud and sad simultaneously. He finished at 11:40, photographed each page, and sent them to Carol's email address. She replied at 11:53 with a single line. This is exactly what I needed. Try to sleep. He wasn't sure he could, but he went upstairs anyway and lay on the bed and closed his eyes. And somewhere in the accounting of what had happened and what was still happening, he found a particular stillness that he recognized, the stillness before an operation, when the planning is done and the execution is waiting, and all you can do is be as ready as you are and accept that it's enough or it isn't. It had gotten him through worse than this. He lay still and let it work. The thing about Adrian Cross was that he was smart in the specific way of people who'd always operated inside systems they understood, who'd learned early that the system had predictable pressure points, and that applying pressure at the right points produced predictable results. He was brilliant at that. 6 years of patient work inside Whitmore Medical was proof of it. What he hadn't ever really needed to understand, what his career hadn't required him to learn, was how to deal with something that didn't operate inside the same system. Cole Mercer didn't operate inside the corporate system. He wasn't a shareholder, wasn't a board member, didn't have a title or a stake or a professional reputation in that world that could be threatened or bought or outmaneuvered. He was a man who knew how to be patient and quiet and present in a space without being seen, who knew how to build a picture from fragments, who knew how to sit with an uncomfortable situation without blinking first. Adrian had reached into Cole's life and grabbed the thing that was supposed to make him flinch. He'd found Emma, said her name, put a number behind it, and a threat wrapped in an offer, and waited for the math to win. And Cole had said no. That was the thing Adrian hadn't modeled. He'd run every version of the calculation that made sense inside the system he understood, and none of those versions included a man who said no to the number when his daughter was on the other side of it, which meant Adrian was now reacting. And a man reacting is a different kind of problem than a man planning. Press conference had been reaction, dressed up as offense. The shareholder complaint was reaction. The defamation threat against Cole specifically reaction, noise, pressure applied to a point that had already held. Cole knew what came after reaction in people like Adrian Cross. He'd seen it in the field, not in corporate boardrooms, but the pattern was old, and it didn't change much based on context. When a calculated man runs out of calculated moves, he starts improvising. And improvisation was where the mistakes happened. Cole woke at 5:30, with that thought clear in his head, like it had finished forming while he slept. He lay in the dark for a moment, then got up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the street below go from empty to the first few shapes of morning: a delivery van, a man with a dog, the particular gray to gold shift of light that meant the day was deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. His phone buzzed at 6:04. Carol, are you awake? Yes. Adrian filed emergency papers overnight. He's arguing the injunction violates shareholder rights under the corporate charter. Hearing is at 9. A pause, then he also sent a private communication to 2 of the institutional investors. Janet found a copy routed through a company server. He's been using the company's own infrastructure, which is either arrogance or desperation. Another pause. I think it's both. Judge Kaufman is not going to like the emergency filing. She granted the injunction. Challenging it 12 hours later implies her judgment was wrong, and she does not respond well to that implication. What do you need from me? Be at the courthouse by 8:30. I may need you as a witness for the access documentation. Bring the original legal pad. Cole looked at the legal pad on the kitchen table. I'll be there. He texted Mrs. Delgado about Emma, who responded in 30 seconds with a thumbs up and a heart emoji, the full extent of her texting vocabulary and somehow exactly sufficient. He made Emma's lunch peanut butter, No jelly. A drawing of Hector the possum, now apparently serving as a Supreme Court justice, which Emma would understand because she knew about the deputy mayor's storyline and left it in the fridge with a note that said, "Gone early for work. Back by noon. Hector is on the pad near the toaster. Put on the cleanest clothes he had that weren't a uniform." He picked up the legal pad. He went to meet the thing that had been building since a stormy night 2 weeks ago, when he'd looked up from a mop bucket and registered a woman getting off an elevator and filed the information the way he filed everything carefully, completely, and with no idea yet what it would cost him or what it would mean. Outside the apartment building, the morning air was clean and cool, the city not yet fully awake, the streets still in that particular quiet that only lasted until 7. Cole stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at nothing specific. He thought about what Carol had told him on the phone. You looked at it clearly and decided anyway. And he held on to that the way you hold on to the specific things that are true when a lot of things are uncertain. Then he walked to his car and drove toward whatever came next. Judge Kaufman took 11 minutes to deny Adrian's emergency filing. Cole knew this because he was sitting in the third row of the courthouse gallery when she did it, the legal pad on his knee, Carol at the plaintiff's table, with the particular stillness of someone who had expected exactly this outcome and was being careful not to show satisfaction about it. The judge's reasoning was brief and direct. The injunction had been properly obtained. The grounds for emergency challenge were insufficient, and the court was not in the business of relitigating decided matters on the basis of what she described, with visible restraint as procedurally premature objections. Adrian's attorney, a tall man named Prescott who wore his suits like armor, received the ruling with a controlled nod that cost him something. Cole watched him. A man like Prescott didn't like losing in open court, and more than that, he didn't like losing a fight his client had insisted was winnable. There would be a conversation between them afterward that neither would enjoy. Adrian himself was not in the courtroom. Cole had looked for him out of habit. You always noted who was and wasn't in a room, and his absence was its own information. A man who'd held a press conference the day before, who'd moved with the confidence of someone executing a long-prepared plan, had chosen not to be present when that plan hit its first hard wall in front of a judge. That told Cole something about what came next. Not retreat. Adrian Cross wouldn't retreat cleanly. His entire architecture was built against that. But recalculation. A pulling back to find another angle, another pressure point, another version of the move that got him closer to what he wanted. The problem, Cole thought as he walked out of the courthouse into the pale morning, was that Adrian was running out of angles he hadn't already tried. Carol fell into step beside him on the courthouse steps. "These SEC made contact this morning," she said, not breaking stride. "Before the hearing. They've opened a formal preliminary inquiry based on our filing. That's not an investigation yet. Preliminary means they're deciding whether to investigate, but it puts Adrian in a position where every action he takes now is potentially subject to review." She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. He knows that. His lawyers know that. Which means the next move, if there is one, is going to be something they calculate can't be used against him in that context, which narrows his options significantly. A pause as they reached the bottom of the steps. Clinical investigator confirmed last night. The adverse event notification goes to trial participants today. 31 families. She said the number plainly, the way you said a number when you wanted its weight to be what it was. They're being told what the company found, what was suppressed, and what the current safety status of their devices is. Carol's words in the notification are careful, no panic, no accusations, just information. The kind of information they should have had months ago. Cole looked at the street. A cab went by. A woman with a stroller navigated the sidewalk with the particular focused efficiency of someone who'd learned to move through the city with cargo. "How are they responding?" he asked. "The clinical team is fielding calls. Most people aren't angry, they're scared, and then relieved, in that specific order that happens when someone finally tells you the truth about something you were already half sensing." She glanced at him. "One of the participants called me directly. A man named Walter, 64 years old, retired teacher. He'd been having a symptom for 3 months that he'd mentioned at his last monitoring appointment and been told was within normal range. It wasn't. It was one of the 3 flagged events." A pause. "He's being seen by his cardiologist today. He said," and I'm paraphrasing because I wrote it down, and the exact words matter to me, he said, "I don't know who decided to tell me the truth, but I'd like to thank them." Cole didn't say anything. "I told him there were a few people involved," Carol continued. "He asked if one of them was a janitor. Apparently, the story has started to circulate in a different shape than Adrian's version. She stopped walking. The financial outlets that ran Adrian's framing yesterday are publishing corrections this morning. Not retractions, they never retract cleanly, but follow-up pieces that present the other side. And when the other side includes 31 families receiving safety notifications, the balance shifts considerably. Cole looked at her. You called someone. I made a few calls last night. Yes. She didn't look apologetic about it. I told you the trial participant angle would reframe the narrative. I believe in using the tools that are available. So do I, Cole said. She nodded once, the nod of someone accepting an armistice on the question of who'd thought of what first. Sophia wants to see you. She's at the office. I'd suggest going now, before the afternoon gets complicated. Is it going to get complicated? Adrian's lawyers requested a meeting with my office for 2 o'clock. That's either a negotiation opening or another delay tactic, and I won't know which until I'm in the room. She started walking again toward her own car. If it's negotiation, things move faster. If it's delay, I'll deal with it. Over her shoulder, go see Sophia, Cole. Sophia was standing at her office window when he arrived. Same window. Same posture as the first morning he'd come to her, as something other than a building employee, arms loosely crossed. Looking at the city, the particular stance of someone who was thinking rather than waiting. She turned when she heard him come in. She looked tired. Not broken down tired, but the specific exhaustion of someone who'd been running on decision-making and adrenaline for 2 weeks, and whose body was starting to send the bill. Her hair was down, which he'd never seen before, always pinned or pulled back, always controlled. Down, it was longer than he'd expected, and it made her look younger and somehow more like herself, less like the version of herself she presented to the world. Court went well, she said. It did. Carol texted me. She dropped her arms to her sides. Adrian's lawyers called her for a 2 o'clock. She told me. Sophia nodded. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he'd learned to read over the past 2 weeks, not quite a calculation, more like she was trying to find the right entry point into something she'd been thinking about. Sit down, she said. I'm fine standing, Cole. Sit down. He sat. She sat across from him, not behind the desk beside it. In the other chair, the way you sat when you weren't positioning yourself as anything. I need to tell you something about Dr. Ellison, she said. Cole felt something shift in his chest. Not alarm exactly, Sophia's face didn't carry alarm, but attention, focused and total. He reviewed Emma's case 2 days ago, Sophia continued. Her records, her imaging, Dr. Paulson's notes. I had Janet coordinate the transfer through our clinical partnerships channel so it moved quickly. She paused. He wants to see her. In person. In Boston. He said, I'm going to give you the actual words because they matter. He said, this is exactly the presentation I would want to operate on. The window is good. The anatomy is workable. I'd want to meet the patient and her father before we schedule, but if the visit confirms what the records suggest, we should move within the next 60 days. Cole sat with that. 60 days. The procedure he'd been calculating toward for 2 years, the number that had sat on his kitchen ceiling at 3 in the morning, the thing Emma's cardiologist described in careful, measured tones within the next 60 days. Cole, Sophia said. I heard you, he said. His voice came out even, which was more a function of training than of what was happening inside him. Cost is covered. Fully procedure, hospital, recovery, follow-up. It's already arranged through the company's Clinical Partnership Fund, which exists specifically for cases like this. There's no favor in it and there's no debt. It's what the fund is for. She paused. I know you'll want to argue with me about that. I wasn't going to argue. She looked slightly surprised. You weren't? I was going to say thank you. He looked at his hands for a moment, the specific places where they were calloused, the things they'd done and the things they hadn't done, and the long, strange road between those two categories. I've been working on accepting help. Emma told me it's what people are for. Something crossed Sophia's face, something that started as almost a smile and ended up being something more complicated and more real. She sounds like someone I need to meet. She's better than both of us. Most kids are. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. I want to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Okay. What you did coming to me, deciding to help, saying no to Adrian when he offered you the exit. I've been trying to find the right way to account for it, and I keep failing because the category it fits in isn't a professional one. She paused. You weren't protecting me because it was your job. You weren't doing it for money or status or because you thought it would benefit you. You did it because something was wrong and you were in a position to do something about it, and that was apparently enough for you. Another pause. I don't know many people like that. I'm not sure I was ever one of them. Cole was quiet for a moment. You built something that could help people like Emma, he said. And you kept saying no to the faster, more profitable version of it because you knew the faster version wasn't safe. You did that for years alone, inside a company that was being hollowed out around you. He met her eyes. You're more like that than you think. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, and he could see her composing herself the way she did, not suppressing. Just organizing, finding the configuration that let her keep moving. The 2 o'clock meeting with Adrian's lawyers, she said. Carol thinks it's a negotiation opening. I think so too. She stood, moved back toward the desk, back to the working posture, the CEO configuration. If he's ready to deal, it ends faster. If he's not, the SEC inquiry and the participant notifications have already changed the terrain enough that his options keep narrowing. She paused. Either way, I think we're close to the end of it. You sound sure. I'm not sure. But I've learned something from watching you operate over the past 2 weeks. She picked up a pen, set it back down, a small fidget, one of the few he'd ever seen from her. You don't predict outcomes. You assess what's actually in front of you, you do the next right thing, and you trust that the accumulation of right things goes somewhere. A pause. I'm trying to do that. Cole looked at her for a moment. It doesn't always work, he said. Sometimes you do everything right and it still goes sideways. I know. I just want you to know I know that, he said. So when I say I think this goes somewhere good, I'm not saying it because I'm certain. I'm saying it because the evidence points there. She looked at him steadily. That's enough, she said. That's actually enough. 2 o'clock meeting lasted 3 hours. Cole wasn't in it. He was in the building's ground floor conference room with a cup of coffee that went cold and his phone face up on the table, waiting, which was a particular kind of hard that he'd never gotten fully comfortable with, no matter how many times he'd done it. Waiting was where you ran out of tasks and had to just sit inside the situation and trust that what you'd already done was sufficient. Called Mrs. Delgado to check on Emma, who was apparently fine and had opinions about the afternoon snack situation that Mrs. Delgado relayed with the good humor of someone who found 7-year-olds fundamentally entertaining. He called Dr. Paulson's office and left a message that there were developments regarding Emma's case and he'd explain at the earliest opportunity. He sat. He drank the cold coffee. He watched the afternoon light move across the conference table in the slow way that afternoon light moved when you were paying attention to it, because you had nothing else to pay attention to. Carol texted at 4:47 he's dealing. Then, 5 minutes later, Adrian Cross has agreed to resign effective immediately pending the completion of a formal internal audit. He's agreeing to cooperate with the SEC preliminary inquiry in exchange for Carol's agreement not to pursue the defamation counterclaim against him personally. His lawyers are also recommending he withdraw the shareholder complaint. Pause, then. He's not admitting criminal liability, that's a separate process, and not mine to control, but the corporate matter is resolving. Another pause, and then one final message. You can breathe now. Cole put the phone down on the table and breathed. It wasn't triumphant. The feeling that moved through him wasn't anything that clean or simple. It was more like the specific release that happened when a thing you'd been braced against for a long time finally stopped pushing, and your body had to remember what it felt like to stand without that pressure. It took a moment. It always took a moment. He thought about Walter, the retired teacher, going to see his cardiologist today with information he should have had 3 months ago. He thought about 30 families receiving a phone call that must have been frightening and clarifying, and in some specific way a relief, the relief of the truth, even when the truth is hard. He thought about Pam from Facilities, who'd noticed a decade ago that something felt wrong about the 14th floor access and had filed it quietly in the folder of things you noticed but didn't ask questions about, and who'd answered his questions with the specific frankness of someone who'd been waiting for someone to ask. He thought about the decisions that had accumulated in the past 2 weeks, the pile of them, some clear and some not. Some he'd made fast, and some he'd sat with at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. He thought about the decision he'd made on his first night at that window in the service elevator. Looking at his reflection in the steel door, a man in a gray uniform, asking himself whether he was really going to do this, and the answer he'd arrived at not through logic, but through something simpler, he couldn't not. Some things you don't choose so much as recognize. The choice was always already made. The deciding is just the moment you admit it. Sophia came down at 5:15. She looked exhausted in a way that had something different in it than the exhaustion of the past 2 weeks, the specific fatigue that comes at the end of something, rather than the middle. She sat across from him at the conference table and didn't say anything for a moment. "It's done," she said. "I know. Carol texted. Of course she did." A brief pause. 2 board members, who were actively coordinating with Adrian, have submitted their resignations as well. Raymond Holt is staying. We talked for an hour after the meeting. He's 72 years old, and he made a bad call, and he's going to spend the rest of his time on that board, trying to make it right. I don't know if that's the correct decision yet. I might regret it. She folded her hands on the table. But he knew my father, and I think some things are complicated enough that you sit with them instead of resolving them fast. Cole nodded. He understood that. The Geneva buyers have been informed that the acquisition discussion is terminated, she continued. Their contact was formally through Adrian, and without Adrian there's no inside arrangement to build on. They could approach through legitimate channels in the future. The technology is still valuable, and eventually it will be commercialized. But it'll be commercialized on a timeline that the safety data supports, not one that a profit margin dictates. She looked at him. 3 adverse event flags are being characterized properly now. The clinical team thinks they've identified the design modification needed. Walter and the others, they'll be monitored closely. The devices are safe for now, with the right follow-up protocol. Good, Cole said. Good, she agreed. They sat in the quiet of the conference room for a moment, the city going on outside the windows, the afternoon settling into evening, the ordinary momentum of the world that had kept moving through everything. What are you going to do now? Sophia asked. Cole thought about it. Go home. Make dinner. Tell Emma that some things worked out the way they were supposed to. That's it? That's a lot, actually. She looked at him. I mean, going forward, the job. What you do. He considered that. I hadn't thought past this, he said, which was true. He'd been operating in a focused present tense for 2 weeks, and the habit of looking further hadn't fully come back. I'm good at a specific set of things. I'd like to find a way to use them that doesn't involve mopping floors indefinitely. A pause. But I liked the building. I liked knowing how it worked. There's a head of physical security position opening in the next 30 days, Sophia said carefully. The current director is retiring. The person who fills it would oversee building security, executive protection protocol, and would work with IT on internal security systems. She wasn't looking at him exactly, looking slightly to the side, which he recognized as her version of trying to make something seem casual. It's a real position. I need someone with real qualifications. You have real qualifications. Cole looked at her. Not a favor, she said. I want to say that clearly. That would be a horrible way to run a company, and I'm trying to run it better. I know it's not a favor, he said, so you'll consider it. I'll consider it. Something settled between them, not resolved, not tied up, but settled in the way of things that had arrived at their correct distance from each other. He'd noticed over the past 2 weeks that he and Sophia operated well in the same space, that they had a rhythm to their communication that had developed without either of them engineering it. She said what she meant, and she didn't require him to say more than he had. He thought things through before he said them, and she didn't mistake his silence for absence. It was functional and honest, and he didn't have a full name for it yet, and wasn't going to try to find one today. I have to go pick up my daughter, he said. I know. She stood when he did. Cole, he stopped. Emma's appointment in Boston, I'd like to come, if that's acceptable. She said it the way she said difficult things directly, without softening it into a question that was really a request, because she'd learned that he preferred directness, and because she was direct by nature anyway. Not as anything official. Just I'd like to be there. He looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said. I think Emma would like that. The appointment was 3 weeks later, on a Thursday in October, when the trees along the Boston streets had gone fully amber and red, and the city had that particular autumn clarity that made everything look slightly more significant than it was, or maybe exactly as significant. Emma held Cole's hand in the waiting room of the Boston Cardiac Center and looked around with the focused curiosity she brought to new spaces, cataloging details in the way she'd apparently inherited from him without either of them arranging it. She had her elephant in her backpack. She'd brought a book about prehistoric ocean creatures that she'd been working through with the seriousness of a researcher. Sophia sat on Emma's other side, which had happened naturally. Emma had arranged seating herself. deciding without apparent deliberation that this was the correct configuration and implementing it. She'd met Sophia for the first time 2 days earlier, when Sophia had come to the apartment for dinner, the first time Cole had cooked for someone besides Emma and Mrs. Delgado in longer than he wanted to count. Emma had evaluated Sophia with the particular focused assessment of a 7-year-old who took people seriously, asked her 3 questions that were not the questions most adults would ask. What was the last book she'd read? Did she know anything about pterosaurs, and had she ever been on a boat, and rendered a verdict that she communicated to Cole later by saying she answered the questions like she actually thought about them. Some adults just say whatever. Now Emma looked up from her prehistoric ocean creatures book and said to Sophia, "Do you know what a mosasaur is?" "I don't," Sophia said. "I'll explain it. It's important." She turned to a page with an illustration and began explaining the mosasaur with the authority of someone who'd been doing research. Cole watched his daughter explain an extinct ocean predator to a CEO in a cardiac center waiting room, and something moved through him that he didn't have an efficient word for it, was something that lived below language, in the part of a person that knows things before words arrive. He thought about Sarah at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, running the numbers that hadn't added up. He thought about the question she'd asked, "Are you here?" and the pause that had cost them something they couldn't get back. He thought about the years that had followed, the leaving, the loss, the long, slow work of making something livable from what remained. He'd spent a long time believing that his life had been divided before and after, military and civilian, the man he'd been trained to be, and the man he was trying to become for Emma's sake. He'd carried those halves like separate weights, never quite sure how to make them into one thing. He wasn't sure he'd resolved it. He wasn't sure it was the kind of thing that resolved. Exactly. But he'd learned something in the past month that he hadn't known before, or hadn't known the same way, the skills that the military had built into him, the patience, the reading of rooms, the ability to sit with hard situations and keep moving. Those weren't a different version of him. Just him. Used badly sometimes, used well sometimes, but his, not a past to manage. Just part of the material he worked with. And the man who told his daughter bedtime stories about a possum in over his head, who drove 20 minutes for the right strawberry yogurt, who sat on an overturned bucket in a supply closet at 11 at night, finding the exact right voice for a story about a judge's wig, that man was also just him. Not a performance of normalcy, the actual thing. He was 37 years old, and he was still figuring out how to be a single person made of all the parts he actually had, and he suspected he'd be figuring it out for a while. That was fine. That was, in fact, how it worked for everyone he'd ever respected. Dr. Ellison came to the waiting room himself to get them, which Cole gathered wasn't standard, but was the kind of thing the man did. He was in his 60s, compact and quick, with the hands of someone who'd spent decades doing very precise work, and the manner of someone who'd never confused expertise with authority. He shook Cole's hand, shook Sophia's, and then crouched down to Emma's level. "You must be Emma," he said. "I am," Emma said. "Do you know what a mosasaur is?" "I do, actually," Ellison said. "Tylosaurus was my favorite. Bigger than most, nastier jaw." Emma looked at him with new respect. "That's a good one," she said. He smiled and stood. "Let's go take a look at that heart of yours." Emma put her book in her backpack and stood up with the particular straightening of a kid preparing for something serious. She reached back and took Cole's hand, and with the other hand, without appearing to think about it, without calculation or ceremony, she reached out and took Sophia's. The 3 of them walked down the corridor together, Emma between them, the elephant jostling in the backpack, the morning light through the center's windows laying long and even across the floor. Cole thought, some families are built from scratch, from unexpected pieces, assembled by circumstances that nobody planned. He thought about the storm and the lobby and the woman at the glass doors, about the supply closet and the coffee from the diner and the yellow legal pad and the envelope in Janet's hands. He thought about the number on the ceiling and the GoFundMe that had raised enough for one appointment, and the night he'd stood in the service elevator, looking at his own reflection, and made the decision he'd already made before he knew he'd made it. He thought about what it meant that a man could spend 6 years trying to become a simpler version of himself and discover, finally, that the simpler version wasn't available, that he was always going to be the full complicated thing. The soldier, and the father, and the person who couldn't walk away from the thing in front of him that needed doing. He thought about Emma's hand in his, small and warm and completely trusting in the way that children trust when they've been given consistent reasons to not blindly, Not without having tested it, but genuinely the real thing. He thought, this is what it was all for. Not the outcome, not Boston or the appointment, or Sophia, or any of the specific shapes the past 2 weeks had taken. The capacity. The ability to be in this corridor, in this life, with this particular child who explained mosasaurs to cardiologists and took people's hands without making a thing of it. The ability to still be here. Emma tugged his hand, slightly impatient, ready, the particular energy of a kid who'd decided the next thing was fine, actually, and was prepared to get on with it. Come on, Dad, she said. He came. The surgery was 6 weeks later. It took 4 hours and 40 minutes, which Cole knew because he counted, sitting in a waiting room that was different from the one in his memory, but felt the same in the essential way. All waiting rooms felt the same. Sophia sat beside him. She'd brought work. She always brought work, but somewhere in the second hour, he noticed she'd stopped looking at it and was just sitting present, which he understood as its own kind of offering. They didn't talk much. They'd gotten to the point where not talking was comfortable, which is a thing that takes longer than people think to arrive at with another person and means something when it does. Dr. Ellison came out at 11:43 in the morning with his cap still on and told them the surgery had gone exactly as planned, that Emma was in recovery and doing well, that the structural repair was clean and the function looked good and she would need follow-up in time, but that her heart, her particular small, stubborn heart that had been working too hard for too long was now built the way it was always supposed to be built. Cole put his face in his hands for a moment, not crying, not quite just pressing the heels of his palms against his eyes and breathing, the specific way you breathe when something you've been carrying for so long you'd forgotten the weight of it finally gets set down. Sophia put her hand on his back, just rested it there. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. He breathed in. Out. In. Then he sat up and looked at Dr. Ellison and said, "Can I see her?" "Give her 20 minutes, Ellison said. "She's going to be groggy and she's going to be fine." Cole nodded. Ellison went back through the doors. Sophia's hand was still on his back. He didn't move away from it. "Thank you," he said, not looking at her, looking at the doors Ellison had gone through. "You don't have to thank me. I know I don't have to." He turned and looked at her. "That's why I'm doing it." She held his gaze for a moment, and something in her face was unguarded in a way that she usually managed more carefully, the specific unguardedness that happens when people stop performing composure, because the moment doesn't require it. "She's going to be okay," Sophia said. "Yeah," Cole said. "She is." He sat back and looked at the ceiling and let the 20 minutes pass the way 20 minutes passes when every second of it is a kind of gratitude. You don't have a big enough word for not to any particular force or fate, just to the fact of it, plain remarkable fact that things had gone this way instead of some other way, that a storm had come in off the coast on a Tuesday night and a woman had gotten off an elevator and a man had looked up from a mop. That small pivot, that nothing moment, that everything. He thought about something his first commanding officer had told him years ago in the specific context of a mission briefing, but in words that had turned out to be about more than missions. You don't get to know, going in, which moments are the ones that matter. You only know looking back. So you treat them all like they might be. He'd spent years trying to figure out what that meant as a way to live, not just a way to operate. He was beginning to think he understood it now. Emma was groggy when they let him in, her face slack, with the particular heaviness of anesthesia wearing off. The elephant on the pillow beside her, because the nurses had been informed about the elephant and had made accommodations. She opened her eyes when she felt his hand and looked at him with the unfocused certainty of someone finding their bearings. "Hey, Bug," he said. "Hey," her voice was hoarse and small. She took a moment to organize herself. "Did it work?" "It worked." She processed this. "My chest feels weird. Going to for a while." "That's normal." "Okay." She moved her hand slightly until it found his and closed around it. "Is Sophia here?" "She's in the waiting room. She'll come in soon." "Okay," another pause. "Dad, yeah. I'm tired." "I know. Sleep." She struggled against the anesthesia for a moment, with the effort of someone who had something important to say before they went under. "I'm glad you didn't walk away. From whatever you were doing. The work stuff." Her eyes were already closing. "I could tell you almost did." Cole was quiet for a moment. "How could you tell?" "You looked like you looked when you're deciding something hard." She was mostly asleep. "I'm glad you didn't. It mattered. I could tell it mattered." He sat beside her until her breathing deepened and evened out, and she was fully asleep, the elephant under her arm, her heart doing the work it was now built to do. He sat there for a long time. This is the thing about ordinary decisions made in corridors and supply closets and service elevators. In the middle of the night, they don't announce themselves as significant. They arrive in the form of a mop and a paper coffee cup and a woman at a glass store who forgot her umbrella. They arrive looking like nothing in particular. And then one day you're sitting beside your daughter in a hospital room in Boston in October, with the trees outside the window going amber and red, and her heart is working right. And there are people in the world, 31 of them, at least, plus the ones who come after them, once the device reaches the people. It was always supposed to reach whose lives are different because of what got done in the small hours of unremarkable nights. You don't get to know going in which moments matter. Cole Mercer sat beside his daughter and listened to her breathe, and let himself believe, for the first time in a long time, that he'd been exactly where he was supposed to be. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.